Hello everyone and welcome to a new video. My name is Marian Guevara and today I'm going to be doing a little book unhaul. The last book unhaul I did was about, I think, a year ago or maybe even more so than that. And I have accumulated enough books where I'm looking to make sure they're going to new homes because they're kind of languishing on my shelves right now. So I have a bunch of books that I've either read, I may have DNF'd, or I'm just not looking to read them. Book unhauls are some of my personal favorite videos to watch on BookTube. I just find the whole process just cathartic to watch, and I do like hearing other people's thoughts as to why this book doesn't appeal to them anymore or why they're letting them go. One thing of note is that if you are interested in any of the titles that you see here in this video, please feel free to contact me at my Instagram. I'll leave my username down below. But yeah, like I said, if you want any of these books, please feel free to reach out, because I'm selling them for pretty cheap. So yeah, without further ado, let's get on with the book unhaul. So the first 4 books that I have to show you are all hardcover. And we have here The Complete Tales and Poems of Edgar Allan Poe. Now, don't get me wrong, I adore Edgar Allan Poe. I adore his poems and his short stories. However, this one is such a hefty book. And if I ever move in the near future, I kind of don't want to deal with packing this one up. And it does put strain on the shelves. So I'm looking to replace this with an edition that isn't as bulky or as thick. Next up, we have Monstrous Tales. These are stories of strange creatures and fearsome beasts from around the world, and this has illustrations by Cija Hong. Now, this is part of a series done by Chronicle Books that you may have seen in a lot of bookstores. They've done Nordic Tales, Celtic Tales, Tales of Japan. This one just focuses on different, monsters or creatures from various different cultures. And I picked this one up mainly because the art in it is just stunning. It, in my opinion, has the best art in any of the books in the series. This has such a diverse collection of stories as well. So you have stories from India, some from Ukraine, Scotland, Australia, just a wide variety. Now, the reason why I'm unhauling this book is that the stories in general are kind of just a mixed bag. Some I liked, some I felt were written very beautifully, then others were kind of clunky and stilted. I definitely feel that this book would have benefited from having footnotes in each of the stories. Because like I said, this is such a diverse collection of tales that you're not going to be familiar with every single culture that the story comes from. So having footnotes would be very beneficial. And some had footnotes, some didn't. And I really felt that there was a missed opportunity to include more footnotes. The next book is Revelator by Daryl Gregory. Now, this one was a bit of a letdown because I assumed that this was just going to be right up my alley. I read the synopsis and there were just elements and buzzwords that really appealed to me. We're following our main character who has to return home upon the death of her grandmother, and it all takes place in the backwoods of the Smoky Mountains. You have this family cult that has its own personal god that they call Ghost Daddy. And I thought I was going to get some Southern Gothic and cosmic horror, and we do get a bit of that. But I think my main gripe with this book in particular was that I just wasn't really all that scared. And I bought this solely for, the horror. I thought I was just getting a straight up horror novel. But this is more about our main character and, following her struggles and her coming to terms with, the secret of Ghost Daddy and how it has affected her family. This one I gave like 3.5 stars. By all means, you could very much enjoy this book. I think it boiled down to personal preference. And then the last hardcover we have is Prince of Song and Sea. This one is by Lindsay Miller. I'm down for a Little Mermaid retelling. I'm open to them, even though I've been burned several times. Personally, it felt like the author wanted to write sort of like this YA swashbuckling, pirate adventure with political intrigue and some paranormal events, and then tried to shove it into The Little Mermaid, and it just didn't work. I feel like you have these 2 different stories with 2 different tones, sort of like clashing with one another, trying to fight with each other, and ultimately the book kind of came off wonky, especially with regards to the tone, because you'd have a scene that is, unique to this book, and then following it, we have a scene from the film, And the two are just so different that it kind of just feels jarring. I also felt that this book had too many characters, like the cast was just too large for its own good. And what characters that we did get that had some sort of, had some prominence were just eh. There were elements that I did like, particularly the one whenever the book focused on Eric and Ariel, them talking with one another, focusing on their chemistry, them trying to overcome this sort of like communication barrier because, Ariel has no voice, she's mute. That was cute. And, it was sweet looking at all the scenes from the original film. But like, as I mentioned, this book felt like two stories that were kind of competing with one another. Next, we have The Secret History by Donna Tartt. Now, I really enjoyed this one. This was like a 4.5-star read. I understand why people, consider this their favorite book. I really enjoyed it. This is over 500 pages. And, I got through it pretty fast. And I tend to go slow through reading. However, this is just a case where I don't foresee myself rereading it in the future anytime soon. And because it's so popular, I can just repurchase it if I wish to do so. And the same can be said for this next book, and that is Of Mice and Men by John Steinbeck. Now, this one, is an American classic, fairly short, heartbreaking, but yeah, not one that I am going to reread in the future anytime soon. Following that, we have Dune by Frank Herbert. I was going to read it and then watch the film. I ended up doing neither. I kind of lost the drive to do either one of those things. I did start this and I ended up stopping. I don't know. It's not calling to me at the moment. So the next one is Frederica by Georgette Heyer. Now, this one I enjoyed, but it's not my favorite, although this is definitely one of her more popular books in her Regency romances. This one follows Frederica, who's, I believe, she and her siblings are orphans, and she goes to their cousin Alverstoke to sort of like ask him for help in their situation. Shenanigans ensue. Like I said, I prefer my Georgette Heyers to be a bit more bombastic. Following Frederica, we have The Sacrifice by Rin Chupeco. This one is quite the shame because I really like the premise of it. This is a YA horror, which I'm open to, reading. And this one takes place in the Philippines on this supposedly cursed island. And we're following a Hollywood film crew who are trying to film a horror film on this island. And all the natives, all the residents are telling them don't do it, but they end up doing it anyway. And this portion of the back is what really caught my interest. Within minutes of their arrival, a giant sinkhole appears, revealing a balete tree with a mummified corpse entwined in its gnarled branches. I really like that imagery, but I started reading it and I could tell it was not going to be for me, which is a shame because I do really dig this premise. If someone can do horror in the Philippines, that'd be great. Next is Oh Pioneers by Willa Cather. This one I kind of just lost interest in picking up. I really enjoyed My Antonia by her, so I thought I'd read Oh Pioneers, but I'm just really not in the mood to read a classic like this. So the next book is one that I read in the beginning of the year, and that is The Hole by Hiroko Oyamada. And once again, the back interested me because it promised to be something quite strange, maybe surrealistic. So we're following a woman named Asa whose husband is getting transferred and they have to move to the country. So she quits her job and they move into this house that is next door to her husband's childhood home. And one day she's going for a walk and she spots this weird creature and she ends up following it down a hole. I tend to have a hard time with Japanese lit or connecting with Japanese lit. I think it might be just due to the cultural differences. I just tend to find a lot of the Japanese books that I pick out, like the classics, I feel like there's just some form of emotional disconnect. Like it just feels sterile, my reading experience with, Japanese novels. And the same was for this case. Don't get me wrong, this proposes, a lot of themes, mainly about society, our role, our niche to fill in society, especially a woman's role, a woman's niche in society. I had a good brain exercise with this book, but other than that, I just don't see any reason to keep it. So next we actually have a DNF. And yeah, bit of a letdown, not gonna lie. This one was a disappointment because I have enjoyed books before from this author, and that is The Custom of the Country by Edith Wharton. Now, I love House of Mirth by her. I really enjoyed Ghost Stories also, but Custom of the Country just didn't do it for me. And it's down to the fact that when I got halfway through the book, I just lost the urge to read it. Because by the halfway mark, I kind of knew where the story was already going. And that's mainly due to our main character of Undine Spragg. I think a lot of the charm that people see in this book is to just how grotesquely unlikable and just how egregious and horrendous her actions are. And, you know, there is this sort of like sardonic humor about how she justifies her horrendous actions. It's interesting to see what kind of excuses or what she does in her pursuit for, you know, the finer things in life, in status and wealth. But ultimately, she's kind of just one note as a character. And so she was very predictable. And therefore, she was kind of boring, and she kind of made the story boring. Unlikable characters are just fine. But boring ones, I can't abide by. So yeah, I ended up DNFing this book. Next is The Midwich Cuckoos by John Wyndham. I enjoyed this one. I gave it 4 stars. But I'm just not going to reread this. The premise is very interesting. You have this town of Midwich. One day is visited by like this strange silver object in the sky. The denizens are put to sleep. The women find out, all the women of childbearing age find out that they're pregnant, and they end up giving birth to this sort of like generation of weird individuals that are obviously not human. So yeah, very interesting concept. It's just that, as I mentioned, I'm not going to reread it. So now we are down to the last book in this Unhaul, and it is the book that I have just recently finished. And not gonna lie, it's another disappointment. That is Roadside Picnic by Boris and Arkady Strugatsky. Now, this is a great shame because I really enjoyed the film Stalker by Andrei Tarkovsky, which was inspired by this book. In fact, I believe it was the Strugatsky brothers who wrote the screenplay for that film. This is a story of like the effects of a first contact. Aliens had arrived on Earth. They've landed on, I believe it's either 5 or 6 areas on Earth that are known as zones. So they arrived and then they left behind various different items. And you have in this world stalkers who sort of like make it their livelihood to sneak into the zones, take all this contraband or all these items, and then sell them off on the black market. There were 2 main elements that I did enjoy about this book. There was a scene where you had 2 characters sort of like discussing the reason behind the visit, or, you know, the cause behind it. The idea that the aliens sort of like stopped on Earth, you know, as a pit stop and then just went up and left, and that all of these items are basically trash or garbage that they left behind. Items that were just so inconsequential that they were willing to leave it behind on Earth. And I think that's very fascinating. Whenever we think of first contact, we always imagine, I think it's very common to imagine that, you know, aliens intentionally reaching out towards humanity. But then in this version, you have the aliens not even minding, you know, humans. That we were just so inconsequential, they didn't really notice us. Similar to the way we treat insects. So I thought that was a very fascinating sort of like theory or look into the idea of, you know, first contact. I also really like the ending. The ending, we have our main character sort of like going through this emotional, philosophical dilemma, and it was very, very interesting. I really liked the way it ended. The rest of the book just felt bare bones to me. While reading this, I was kind of reminded of reading Ernest Hemingway, where there's a bit of like minimalistic style to it, which I'm not a fan of. I just expected a bit more depth out of the story than what I got. So yeah, ultimately this was kind of just like a letdown. Those were all the books that I'm looking to unhaul, and as I mentioned before, if you're interested in any of these titles, please feel free to contact me on my Instagram. I'll happy to arrange something with you. And yeah, thank you for clicking on this video. Give it a like if you like it, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye!